Thank you for that introduction. I am Rick Denton, and I am with EX for CX, Execution for Customer Experience. I'm also the host of CX Passport, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Thank you, Arcet Global, for this opportunity, and thank you for watching today. And I hope that you get something insightful and get a piece of information that you're able to take away today and use in your daily life. I also want to encourage you as we go through this to use that Q&A function as you have a question that comes up as we're talking today. Immediately following this, there will be a live Q&A section, and so feed those questions into that Q&A box. We'll be able to address those later. So I'm talking to you today from Frisco, Texas, which is actually inside of the Dallas, Texas area here in North Texas. And I think a lot of you may know that one of the things we Texans love is we love our Tex-Mex. And one of my favorite places is Mia's Tex-Mex, and it has been around since 1981. It is one of those places that is a classic Tex-Mex. It's been in an old building, and it's the kind of place where you truly can, and this is not an exaggeration, you will be sitting at dinner right next to a crew that just finished doing some work on the street outside the hours before. There's then the next table over will be a former president. The next table over will be, a family with a bunch of school kids, and the next table over could be Jerry Jones. This is a place that serves the entire community. This is a place that has great food, old building, lots of heritage. Generations have eaten there. Well, my daughter and I went down there to go have a meal here. I think it was a month or so ago, and we were driving around and wondering what happened to our Mia's. Where did it go? And we drove around and looked, and about a block over, we see this big, shiny new sign, Mia's Tex-Mex. We thought, could that really be the place? Is that where we want to go? Well, we went ahead and went in. We'd already made the trip down to Dallas and stopped in there and realized, why, yes, this is in fact the Mia's that we have known. The outside was different. The lighting was different. The decor was different. There was a lot more space. That was different. That was good, but the fundamentals were the exact same. It was a great meal in a casual environment where anyone could feel comfortable going in there for that meal. So much has changed in 2020. We've heard that 2020 is the year that everything changed. But I submit to you that 2020 is the year that not everything changed. Now we know that things have changed, right? Some of the most meaningful moments in people's lives, like a wedding, taking place over Zoom. Graduations, as people move to that next stage of life, drive through graduations, virtual graduations, even the way we work, or just this webinar today is an example of how so much has changed, but some things have not. And that is the customer's expectation around the experience they receive has not changed. The customer's expectation around experience has not changed. And no different than how my daughter and I had a great experience at Mia's because the fundamentals were the same of the great food, the great environment, the openness to anyone there. Even though so much had changed about Mia's, the fundamentals hadn't changed. And that's true of 2020, and that's true of your customer experience. There's really three principles of CX that I want to talk about today that have not changed. One is the need for a total voice of the customer VOC program. The second is the need to rely on your front line for great customer experience. And lastly, the customer does not care about your COVID or any other excuses. So let's talk about total VOC approach. And if you hear one thing today, hear this. You have to move beyond survey and score and into listen and act. That is a true total voice of the customer program, moving from survey and score to listen and act. So, survey and score, that's what a lot of companies do, right? They send out a survey and then they applaud when the score goes up and then they shed a little tear when the score goes down. But listen and act is really across nine main dimensions. So, listen, and if you see here on the slide, these nine dimensions, listen is across collect, analyze, and global. And let's talk about that collect piece. A lot of folks hear voice of the customer and they think survey, but the reality is, what are your customer listening posts? What are all the ways that your customers speak to you? That can be surveys. Great. I love surveys, but if that's all you're doing, you're not doing enough. Are you listening to what you're hearing them say when they call into your contact centers? Are you monitoring what they're saying on social media? Are you letting your frontline report back to the human to human interactions that you're having there? How are you collecting and understanding all of your customer listening posts? Second key part of that, though, is analyze. It's great that you collect all that information, but what are you doing with it? There are going to be some key themes that you hear in there, some recurring instances. You're going to hear complaints. You're going to see things that you're doing well. What are you doing to analyze that in a disciplined way and be able to go beyond just listening to what the customer's saying, but then really acting and doing something with it? And I want to touch briefly on global here. One of the key things about a company that has a global reach is understanding that your customers may speak to you in different ways across different borders, geographies, and languages. And I'm not just talking about language, although that's vitally important. If I weren't a native English speaker, I would certainly be more responsive if you were asking for my feedback out in a language that was my native language, but it can go into even the methods by which you are collecting that input. So in the US, we might be more familiar with SMS, we might be more familiar with surveys, but are you using WeChat with your Chinese customers? Are you using the mode of communication that your customer prefers? And are you making sure that you are collecting from a global environment when that is your customer base? But once you've collected that, what are you doing to act? And it's really three themes. There are multiple boxes in there, but there's really three themes. There is the closed loop feedback, both internal and external. And there's the items that help support employee experience and engagement. And then how do you keep the customer at the center? That's the real act. Briefly touch on closed loop feedback. So the external closed loop feedback is what we are probably most familiar with. And that is customer calls in with concern and we fix that concern. But I want you to go one step further. And I'm absolutely stealing this from Disney, leveraging some of the great customer service guidance that Disney presents to us. And that is don't just fix issues. Restore relationships. It is vital that you restore that relationship, not just fix that issue. I think we understand that external closed loop feedback, it's pretty common, pretty known, but focus on restoring the relationship. The internal closed loop feedback is where I'd really like you to hear this. And that is, do you have a disciplined and a thoughtful process to collect, to analyze the inputs that your customers provide, discern the key themes, and then do something with it? Be able to realize, okay, our pricing is a problem, our efficiency is a problem, the way that we interact with our customer problem. What does that look like? And then how do we take the steps to fix that? Yeah, we've heard of the process improvement, Six Sigma, lean, all of those things can certainly and absolutely apply. But what is your process to be able to ensure that you are solving and then closing the loop from an internal perspective, the customer issues that are brought to bear? The employee experience and engagement really is across three main areas: inspire, celebrate, and coach. The reason why inspire and celebrate are two different is celebrate is really about the individual. How do we make sure that that individual feels special about what they experienced with the customer and know that the customer's recognition of them has cascaded to them and they feel celebrated and it's meaningful? Inspire is, are you capturing your customer stories in such a way that you can use them to retell and motivate your employee base with the great things that you and your brand promise are actively delivering, and use those to inspire? And then that last piece of coach, coach sometimes gets a pejorative associated with it. Oh, I'm going to coach you. But if you think about your best athletic coaches and your best example of the coaches that are out there in the world, those are the ones that are there to help amplify the things that you're doing well, really help you grow in the areas that you're doing well, along with helping you correct the areas that you have the opportunity to improve. Using the customer's input to be a part of that coaching is such a vital part of a total VOC program. Lastly, making the customer at the center. Are your business decisions being driven by what the voice of the customer is telling you? We've heard it, it's almost cliche at this point, but it's effective. The empty chair that Amazon uses to represent the customer at their meetings. Using call listening as a way to inspire folks to understand, hey, this is what the customer is telling us. All of those things are key inputs in a total VOC program to make sure that you are putting the customer at the center. So again, if you don't hear any of those details, hear this. A total VOC program is a fundamental piece of customer experience that has not changed, and you must move from survey and score to listen and act. The second area that I want to talk about is a reliance on the front line. We talk a lot about, yay, the front line. We're rooting for the front line. These are the folks that are really engaging with the customer. But are you actually doing anything more than words? A lot of times this group is they're ignored or minimized in the creation and the insight around customer experience. But the reality is your front line is closer than anyone to the customer. If they're on the phone with them, if they're chatting with them, if they're engaging with them across a counter in a physical retail space, they know what the customer is experiencing. They don't have to discern it through intermediate sort of steps of information, but rather they're experiencing what the customer is experiencing and know exactly what's happening. So, are you doing a good job of collecting that information? Do you have the process? Do you have the tools? Do you have the approach that you need to collecting that insight? I'll give you an example of how that is manifested here for me in the North Texas area. We have two major airlines in this area. And I do a lot of business travel. And one of the things that, guess what? Business travel a lot of times will have something that goes awry. In that business travel, when I call in to either get something fixed or talk about it, it's the customer experience guy in me. Of course, I'm going to say, hey, you have a place to capture this feedback? Do you have somewhere that this problem, that this issue that I'm raising can actually be communicated up? And using those two airlines, which will remain nameless, I've had the exact opposite experience. I appreciate the honesty of one of them. That airline, that agent said, no, I really don't. I don't have anywhere to put that. I'm sorry you went through that. At least they were kind about that. But I have nowhere to capture that. I'm sorry. Why don't you send an email into our customer service or send an email or a letter in? The second airline that I wanted to talk about, had a similar issue. Some concern came up. I called them, and the person, and you could tell immediately, they're like, absolutely. I know exactly what to do. They start typing. Yeah, I can kind of hear the keys going. And they say, yeah, absolutely. I submit this. There's a group that takes care of it. The agent could even tell me what the process was. And that gave me such a sense that this is an area, this is a company, and this is an organization that cares about the customer. That fundamental, they definitely knew how to rely on the front line. But it's only half of the story. If that's where go, great, you've collected. But just like any good relationship, there needs to be two paths in that relationship. There's the give and the take, right? And so, are you doing a good job of what you've understood, what you've analyzed? Are you bringing that back to the front line? We talked about celebration earlier. That's certainly a key element to giving that back to the front line. But are you using the insight that the front line's giving you and then creating these customer experience initiative ambushes on your front line? Or have you looped them in a way that they co-design with you, that they at least understand what's taking place, and that they actually are working with you to bring those customer experience insights, solutions, and initiatives forward, and they partner with you? So why does that matter? Some of this seems like it would be extremely simple, but why would it matter? Why do we need to include our frontline in there? And I want to tell you sort of three areas. One is employee engagement. And we described that a little bit earlier, right? If we celebrate, if I'm bringing that to the employee, it motivates them and it celebrates them and honors them and also sets up a framework of, okay, that's the behaviors that are celebrated. I'm going to do those behaviors. It also builds empathy. If the front line hears these customer stories and they understand that it builds both an empathy for the employee to the customer, but also helps them know that there is a corporation that headquarters maybe to the frontline empathy that exists. That empathetic sort of spirit and that ability to understand what the customer is experiencing and live life in their shoes is reinforced with this cyclical reliance on the front line. And the last is break down barriers. And I want to tell you a story that I experienced at a company that I worked at several years ago. And it was a call had come in, and we were doing a call listening session. And the call came in and it went a little bit like this. Hey, I'm really sorry. I know you asked me to get those documents in. I know you told me to get those documents in by Friday. I know, and I know I'm behind, but my uncle just died. It was kind of unexpected. And I had to take care of the funeral and the family. And we were just sort of upset by that and just really dealing with all that. And I'm just really sorry about not getting the documents in on time. Okay, well, if you can just get those documents back to us by Tuesday, that'll be great. All of us listening to the call just gasped. How could there be such a cold response to someone who is sincerely grieving here? This is not a case of they're, oh, they're making up stories. Sincere grief is coming to the phone. And we talked to this person. We knew this person. This person had a deep heart for the customer. This was unexpected behavior. And we asked this person, hey, what happened there? And the agent said, I thought I had to be professional. The light bulbs go off. We realize what had happened. We as a company, we as a leadership had failed our agents and had failed in training them that being professional doesn't mean not being human. And so having this cyclical loop allowed us to break down that specific barrier around professionalism. And with that agent allowed us to tell that story. It allowed us to teach that across the organization, and it allowed us to break that barrier of professionalism down. And so now the next time, and God forbid it happens again, but should it happen again, I guarantee that agent is going to have an incredible warmth and care and concern for that customer because that agent now knows that being professional is it's okay to be human while being professional. Let me give you the last one, and that is the customer does not care about your excuses. Let me say it again. The customer does not care about your excuses. More specifically, the customer does not care about your COVID excuses. I'm surprised that I'm still here in September 2021 saying that same sentence, but I am. And let me pull this out and show you that I have actual live examples today on websites, September 3rd, of people and companies that are still using COVID excuses. So, website one, I won't use any brands, don't worry. Due to coronavirus concerns, there may be higher call volume and longer wait times in our call center. We apologize for any inconvenience. Let me go to the second website. Effective 8/30/2021. Folks, this isn't ancient information. That's just from a week or so ago. Service impacts related to coronavirus, and then proceeds to explain the service delivery impact. It is September 2021. Your customer does not care about your COVID excuses. They don't care about your excuses in general. But more specifically, we are talking about a pandemic that, at least for the US, has been mentally marked with March 2020 as being the initial real serious impact. And using that as the marker, with a year and a half under our belt, the customer has expected that companies have solved for this. Now, this is not to diminish the fact that these are real impacts. There are companies that are still struggling, and legitimately so, from the virus, from the pandemic. Where do we work? How can we have people keep them healthy? How can we keep them safe? How do we operate in an environment that is still incredibly disruptive? But going back to that customer focus, your customer does not care. Initially, they offer grace, but only for a bit of time. And I would say that take back to that spring and early summer of last year, customers were very willing to be forgiving of coronavirus impacts, but no longer are they in that same state of forgiveness. And it's primarily for two reasons. One, fatigue. At some point, they expect that the company has solved for that. But the second is your competitors have already solved for that. And so, and not even your competitors, other companies have solved for that. And it is very true in customer experience that a customer expects your company to deliver as great of an experience as the best of the customer experience delivery companies do, not just someone from your industry. Someone well outside of your industry is what's setting your customers' expectation around experience. And so leaving excuses still on the table and even labeling them still coronavirus excuses absolutely turns your customers off and makes your company, honestly, the butt of many jokes. And so companies that have solved for this, customers are already voting to where it is solved. They are already moving their wallet, they're moving their spending to those companies. I want to make sure you hear me. I'm not diminishing the issue. It is a real issue for many companies, for many individuals, for families. We are all still very much impacted by this. But the reality is, your customer does not care. And those companies that are using this moment to improve, to deliver great customer experience, to find a way through this, those are the ones that are going to win. Those are the companies that are going to see customers voting with their wallets in the future. So, why does this matter? Take a look at this slide. And using this slide as a barometer, this slide talks about international travel, international passenger travel. And notice how it goes through various crises starting with 9/11, but inclusive of MERS and SARS and swine flu and financial crises. If you look at that graph, you'll see that after every crisis, there was a dip, and that dip was significant, but then immediately it shot back up. So, why does this matter? Things are going to get better. Things have already gotten better for many sectors, for many people, many individuals, but ultimately we will get through this. And so, a company that is recognizing that there's an end to this and using this opportunity to realize the customer is going to come roaring back, that's an important part of delivering great customer experience. Those foundational elements of customer experience have not changed. So, what do we do with this information? What do we need to know about this? Well, taking those 3 points, flip them on their head. Make sure that you have built your ability to listen and act. Make sure that you are going beyond survey and score to listen and act and creating a total voice of the customer program. Secondly, check with that frontline connection. Make sure that you've got the healthy frontline connection that you need. Don't assume that you have it. Ask your frontline. Get out there, live your frontline. Go out there and experience the frontline and see if you can find a way to submit customer insights back to headquarters and see if you living on the front line actually understand what the company is doing with customer experience. Go out there and make sure that that connection that you have with your front line is the one that you need to deliver great customer experience. And if you don't have that set up, get started today. Make sure it doesn't have to be complex or overly technical. Just make sure that you've got a way to deliver, to receive that input from your front line, and then be able to submit that information back to the front line. And lastly, don't waste the moment. We know it's going to get better. We know that there's an opportunity here for companies to understand that 2020 is the year that not everything changed, and those foundations of customer experience are absolutely there. So no different than how Mia's went through a major change, and all of the outside and all of the visible elements of Mia's looked different, it felt different, but their fundamentals hadn't changed. The same is true of customer experience. And I hope that you today will take those 3 items, move those forward, and be able to deliver great customer experience for you and for your company going forward. I want to thank you all today. I want to thank Arcet Global again for this opportunity. Don't forget about that Q&A. Here in a few minutes, we'll be able to answer your questions live, and really looking forward to that. So thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you the best rest of your day.